There is a moment most people never recognize until it is already too late. It happens in the middle of an argument when you start over-explaining yourself to someone who has already decided not to understand you. It happens when you send a second message, because the first one was left unread. It happens when you lower your standards quietly, hoping someone will notice the sacrifice and finally give you what you asked for with your silence. It happens when you shrink yourself, your opinions, your time, your dignity, just to keep someone comfortable enough to stay. Most people live their entire lives inside that moment, chasing, explaining, waiting, hoping, adjusting, apologizing for who they are, begging not with words but with behavior, for a place at a table that was never really set for them. The Stoics had a word for what most people are doing in these moments. They called it living in accordance with opinion rather than nature, and they considered it one of the most dangerous conditions a human being could fall into. Not dangerous because it is painful, though it is, but dangerous because it is invisible. You do not feel yourself becoming smaller. You simply wake up one day and realize you are not sure who you are anymore outside of your need for someone else's approval. This video is about something the ancient Stoics understood with remarkable clarity: the discipline of disappearing. Not running away, not hiding, not revenge or cold indifference dressed up as strength, but the quiet, deliberate act of withdrawing your energy, your explanations, and your pursuit from anything and anyone that requires you to diminish yourself to maintain the connection. If this kind of thinking is new to you, or if you have been searching for a philosophy that actually holds up under real pressure, not just in theory, not just in calm moments, but when you are standing in the fire of rejection, misunderstanding, or loss, then stay with this. If you find value in what we discuss here, like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Stoic Zeno. We go deep here, every single time. Now, let us begin. There is a Roman emperor who ruled one of the most powerful empires in the history of the world. He commanded armies. He held the fate of millions in his hands. And yet, in his private journal, a journal he never intended for anyone else to read, he wrote this to himself: "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Marcus Aurelius did not write this as inspiration. He wrote it as a reminder, because even he, emperor, philosopher, general, had to fight every single day against the pull of external validation, against the desire to be understood, against the temptation to chase what was not freely given. If Marcus Aurelius needed that reminder, what does that tell you about you? It tells you that the struggle is not weakness. The struggle is human. But what separates those who are consumed by the struggle from those who are refined by it is a single foundational decision. The decision to stop making yourself responsible for what other people choose not to see. Chasing is not love. It is not loyalty. It is not even effort in any meaningful sense. Chasing is fear wearing the costume of devotion. When you chase someone, a person, an opportunity, approval, a response, you are not acting from strength. You are acting from a terror that without this thing, without this person, without this validation, you are somehow incomplete. And the Stoics would look at that belief and say, that is the root. That is where the suffering begins. Not with the person who left, not with the opportunity that closed, but with the internal story that says you needed it to be whole. Epictetus, who was born a slave and became one of the most influential philosophers in Western history, understood this better than almost anyone. He had nothing by the world's definition. No property, no status, no freedom of movement, and yet he taught with absolute conviction that no one, not a master, not a tyrant, not a lover, not a friend, could take from you what was truly yours. He said it simply: seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life. Most people read that and think it is about passive acceptance. It is not. It is about the radical act of refusing to let your peace depend on the behavior of another person. It is about understanding that the moment you begin chasing, you have already handed over the most important thing you possess, your self-governance, to something outside your control. So the first thing to understand is this: you do not chase because you care deeply. You chase because somewhere, you stop trusting yourself to be enough without the confirmation of someone else. And that is not a character flaw. That is a wound. But wounds, the Stoics would tell you, do not heal by reopening them. They heal by leaving them alone and focusing on what actually belongs to you. Now let us talk about explaining, because this one is perhaps more insidious than chasing. It hides better. It looks like communication. It looks like vulnerability. It looks mature, even. But there is a version of explaining that has nothing to do with genuine connection, and everything to do with the desperate need to control how another person sees you. You know this version. You have lived it. It is the paragraph you typed at 2 in the morning trying to make someone understand why you acted the way you did. It is the conversation where you kept adding context, kept refining your argument, kept going deeper into your own reasoning, hoping that if you just found the right words, they would finally get it. They would finally see you accurately. They would finally grant you the verdict you were looking for. And here is what Seneca understood about that impulse. It is not about them. It has never been about them. It is about your relationship with your own conscience. If your conscience is clear, if you know why you did what you did, if your actions were aligned with your values, then the explanation is not for them. It is for you. It is you trying to outsource your self-acceptance to another person's judgment, Seneca wrote in his letters. It is not that I am brave. It is that I know what is worth fearing. And what he feared was not misunderstanding. What he feared was the loss of himself in the pursuit of being understood. Because he recognized, as any serious student of Stoic thought must eventually recognize, that the people who require the most explanation are rarely the people capable of receiving it. Think about the times in your own life when you felt the most compelled to explain yourself. Was it ever to someone who was already open, already listening, already generous in their interpretation of you? Or was it almost always to someone who had already decided, someone whose verdict was in before you started speaking, and yet you spoke? For hours sometimes you made your case, you laid out the evidence, you showed your work, and it changed nothing. Because it was never a trial that could be won with evidence. It was a performance, and in performing it, you gave away something you did not get back easily. Your sense that your own understanding of yourself was enough. Marcus Aurelius came back to this again and again in the Meditations. He had people around him every day who misunderstood him, who plotted against him, who spread false accounts of his character and his decisions. And his response, recorded in his own hand, was not to correct them publicly, not to defend himself at length, but to return, again and again, to the question of whether he himself was living well. He wrote, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect. Self-respect, not reputation, not public image, not the relief of being correctly understood. Self-respect, the internal standard that does not require a witness. When you stop explaining yourself to people who are not genuinely asking, and you can tell the difference even if you pretend you cannot, something remarkable happens. The silence that used to feel like abandonment starts to feel like authority. Not the cold authority of someone who has nothing inside, but the warm, settled authority of someone who has decided that their inner life is not public property. And then there is disappearing. This is the one people misunderstand most. They hear it and they think, withdrawal, punishment, the silent treatment, emotional unavailability, cold, calculated absence designed to make someone miss you. That is not what the Stoics meant. That is not what this is about. Disappearing in the Stoic sense is not a strategy. It is not something you do to someone. It is something you do for yourself. It is the recognition that your presence, your time, your attention, your energy, your love, is not infinitely renewable. It is not a resource that exists outside of you somewhere in endless supply. It is you. It is drawn from you. And when you spend it in spaces that do not honor it, in relationships that consume without reciprocating, in arguments that generate heat but never light, you are not being generous. You are being careless with the one life you have been given. Epictetus taught his students something about this that has stayed with me since I first encountered it. He described the practice of making a clear distinction between what is up to us and what is not. And he was ruthless about it. Other people's choices, whether to value you, whether to stay, whether to respond, whether to grow, those are not up to you. What is up to you is how you spend the time that follows the moment you recognize that truth. Disappearing is that moment made into a decision. It is you saying, I am not going to keep pouring water into a container that has no bottom. Not because I am angry, not because I want to cause pain, but because I understand now that water, this particular water, this irreplaceable resource, matters. And I have finally decided to treat it as though it does. There is something Seneca wrote that I return to often. He said, retire into yourself as much as you can. Not from life, not from people, but from the noise, from the constant outward motion of seeking, from the endless negotiation with the external world over your own worth. Retire into yourself, which means stop spending yourself on what does not return you to yourself stronger. The person who disappears gracefully, not dramatically, not with announcements, not with parting speeches, but simply and quietly redirects their energy inward. They stop showing up where they are not valued. They stop speaking where they are not heard. They stop fighting for space in rooms that were never built to hold them. And they begin, often for the first time, to discover what they are actually capable of when they stop spending all their energy on the resistance. Now I want to address something honestly, because you may be sitting with this and thinking, but what about relationships that matter? What about people I love who sometimes misunderstand me? Am I supposed to just go silent? Just disappear on everyone who does not immediately understand me? No, that is not the teaching, and the Stoics would never suggest it. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire with thousands of relationships, many of them complex, many of them difficult. Seneca was a counselor, an advisor, a mentor. Epictetus taught. They were all deeply engaged with the world and with other people. But there is a difference, a crucial difference, between a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine curiosity about one another, and a dynamic built on your constant need to justify your existence to someone who has decided you are insufficient. In the first kind of relationship, you do not need to chase. The connection has its own gravity. You do not need to explain compulsively, because you are already being heard. Misunderstandings happen, yes, but they are addressed from a position of mutual good faith, not from fear. In the second kind, the kind built on your smallness as the foundation, there is no explanation that will be enough. There is no amount of presence that will feel adequate. There is no version of you, no matter how carefully you construct and present it, that will satisfy the requirement, because the requirement was never about you specifically. It was about the role you were being asked to play in someone else's unresolved relationship with themselves. The Stoic practice here is not indifference to people. It is discernment about which people, which dynamics, which interactions call you forward into your best self and which ones slowly dissolve you. And once you have made that discernment clearly, without sentiment clouding the judgment, the action becomes obvious. You redirect your presence. You invest your limited life in what is actually living and growing and worth the cost. There is also the matter of what happens inside you when you stop chasing and explaining, because this is where people get surprised. They expect to feel free immediately. They expect relief, and sometimes there is relief briefly. But then something harder comes. Because when you stop chasing, you have to sit with the possibility that what you were chasing may not come back. And when you stop explaining, you have to accept that some people will keep their wrong impression of you. And when you disappear from dynamics that were consuming you, you have to face the silence that remains. And in that silence, the question arises, who are you, actually, without all of this motion? This is the question the Stoics considered the most important question a person could face. Not what do you want, not what do you feel, but who are you by nature, stripped of all the external performance and approval seeking. Marcus Aurelius asked himself this constantly. He kept coming back to virtue, not as a concept but as a practice. He kept asking, am I acting in accordance with my nature as a rational social being? Am I choosing well right now in this moment? Not am I liked, not am I understood, am I choosing well? That internal question, asked honestly and repeatedly, is the thing that fills the silence. It is the thing that makes the disappearance productive rather than empty. Because you are not disappearing into nothing. You are disappearing from noise and into clarity. You are taking back the attention you had been spending outward and returning it to the only place where real change is ever possible. Inward. Seneca put it this way: the whole future lies in uncertainty. Live immediately, not later, not when things settle, not when you have finally been understood by everyone who once misunderstood you. Now, live the life that is actually yours now, with the energy that is available to you in this moment, directed at what is genuinely within your power to shape. Let me tell you what this looks like in practice, because philosophy without application is just beautiful furniture nobody sits in. It looks like reading a message that dismisses you and not responding to prove yourself. Not because you have given up on the relationship, but because you have decided that your dignity is not negotiable, and the response that rises from wounded pride will cost you more than the silence. It looks like someone misrepresenting you to others and choosing not to run around correcting the narrative. Not because the truth does not matter, but because your actions over time will speak more clearly than any explanation you could offer in the moment of defensiveness. It looks like noticing that you have been the one reaching out in a friendship for 6 months and simply stopping, not with anger, not with a confrontation, not with a speech about reciprocity, but quietly, to see what the relationship looks like when you are not the one holding it up alone. It looks like ending a conversation that has turned into a loop, where you are saying the same thing in different ways, and being heard in none of them. Not because you are punishing the other person, but because you have recognized that continuing is a choice to stay in pain that serves no one. It looks like someone asking why you left, why you went quiet, why you stopped engaging, and giving them the shortest honest answer, without the paragraph of justification, without the list of grievances, without the careful argumentation. Just the truth, briefly, with no performance around it. This is what the Stoics were pointing at. Not a cold, disconnected existence, not walls, but discernment. The conscious, daily, often difficult choice to spend your one life on what is actually worth the price. And there is one more thing I want to leave you with, because it is the piece that ties everything together. The Stoics were not advocating for withdrawal from life. They were advocating for full, complete, undiminished engagement with life, but on your own terms, in accordance with your own nature, directed by your own reason rather than pushed around by the reactions of everyone around you. When you stop chasing, you do not become cold. You become available to the things that actually deserve your pursuit. When you stop explaining, you do not become dishonest. You become clear about which conversations are worth your depth. When you disappear from what diminishes you, you do not vanish. You arrive, fully, powerfully, without apology, in the spaces and relationships that were built for the full version of you, not the apologetic, smaller, endlessly justifying version that most people mistake for humility. That is the teaching. That is what three of the most rigorous minds in philosophical history were pointing at across centuries and across very different lives. The common thread in all of them, the slave, the emperor, the statesman, was this: the life of dignity is not the life of constant pursuit and constant defense. It is the life of self-possession, the life of someone who knows what they are, acts accordingly, and does not wait for the world's agreement before proceeding. You are not required to be understood by everyone. You are not required to chase what withholds itself from you. You are not required to explain yourself to people who have already decided their verdict. You are required, by reason, by nature, by the very fact of being a conscious being with finite time, to live as though your life belongs to you, because it does. It always did. You just forgot for a while. And the moment you remember, truly remember, not as a thought but as a decision, is the moment everything changes. Not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly, the way the most important changes always happen. You stop chasing. You stop explaining. You simply become. If this reached you, if something in these words landed where it needed to, then do not let it stop here. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below, because I read them, and your perspective contributes to what we build in this space. Like this video if it gave you something real, and subscribe to Stoic Zeno if you want to keep going deeper into the philosophy that has survived 2,000 years because it works. The Stoics did not write for their moment. They wrote for yours. And we will keep bringing their words to life here, as long as you keep showing up. Until next time, choose well.